I'm Ed Adams, Triangle Chapter historian, and I have the pleasure today of talking with Mr. Burgess Jennings, who was the 1949 president of the American Society of Refrigeration Engineers. To begin with, Mr. Jennings, tell us about where you grew up.
Well, I was born in Baltimore and Maryland and spent the first part of my life there. I went through the city schools, enjoyed them very, very much. Then when I graduated from high school, I decided to go to college and selected Johns Hopkins University, which was also in Baltimore. I took mechanical engineering and got my degree in 1925. Shortly afterwards, I married my good wife, Etta, and we had one child named Robert.
What college did you attend, and what did you study?
Actually, as I mentioned, my field was mechanical engineering, and so I thought I ought to do something in the line of engineering, and I took my first job with the power company in Baltimore and enjoyed my work very much. But I realized that if I were going to get ahead in the world, I would have to get a little more education. So I looked around for a place to do further studies and selected Lehigh University, where I was offered a starting instructorship and the privilege of doing whatever graduate study I wanted to carry out. I enjoyed Lehigh University very much and made good progress there. I was promoted and moved into professorship grades, and at the same time started writing some books. But I also started consulting, and I want to talk a little more about that later.
Tell us about your career.
All of the courses I dealt with were in mechanical engineering, and shortly after I'd started at Lehigh, I became very much interested in refrigeration, a subject that I had considered very slightly before. Actually, what got me most interested in refrigeration was some consulting, which I was asked to do, because one of the local companies was trying to develop absorption refrigeration as a means of making use of the basic product which existed in the Lehigh Valley, namely hard coal. And at a plant in Pottsville, they had actually built an absorption machine. My part in this was to do some theoretical work and some design on future plants. So this is where refrigeration started for me. In order to help me along in this regard, I joined ASRE in 1935. I think it was 1935 at least, and made use of ASHRAE's publications in my work.
After Lehigh University, where did you go from there?
I joined the staff at Northwestern University as a full professor and started teaching in the mechanical engineering department. Actually, Northwestern University had gotten a big gift from a man named Walter P. Murphy, and with this gift they had founded the Technological Institute of Northwestern University. And I taught at Northwestern until I retired in 1972. In 1955 and 56, at which time I was very active in ASHVE. I was chairman of the Committee on Research in that society. And as you know, the society had a large research laboratory in Cleveland. A little trouble developed, and they needed a new director. I volunteered to ask for a leave from Northwestern University to satisfy some of these difficulties they were in at the laboratory, one of which was how difficult it was to collect money from the industry, because although they liked what the laboratory was doing, the industry hated to pay for it. So I took my leave from the university, directed the laboratory for the 3 years that I was allowed to be away from the university without losing my tenure. And we had very satisfactory work done at the laboratory during that period. Shortly after that, the difficulty of getting money from industry caused the directors of what was now ASHRAE to discontinue the laboratory and distribute its operation into the colleges.
You had a number of textbooks and papers published. What topics were these on?
Most of the writing which I have done, besides small papers, has been in the area of heat power, air conditioning, and refrigeration. And actually, in all, I published about 8 textbooks, and although the readership of these textbooks was small, because they were designed for top-level classes in college, I think about 250,000 of them were in use at one time. I don't know how many are still extant, but at least that many were distributed and sold.
Did you have any patents, and what were they for?
The patents were all in the area of refrigeration, and actually mostly in the area of absorption refrigeration. I think I ought to tell you a little more about an earlier part of my life which fits into this. Actually, at my age, I have watched the birth and development of air conditioning, refrigerators, modern refrigeration, and the whole birth of this industry, because it nearly all occurred in this century. At the beginning of this century, there were no safe refrigerants. All the refrigerants had an element of toxicity or danger. And this limited really the growth of refrigeration. Willis Carrier, who has been called the father of refrigeration, actually realized that people like to be cool in summer. If they went to a theater, they didn't want to have to sweat it out. They wanted to be cool and comfortable. So he said, we've got to get cooling in big buildings. And in the 1900 to 1910 area, he started pushing that idea and using not safe refrigerations and putting the units on the roof so they wouldn't get in any way to harm individuals in the theater. He developed cooling. But the real need for refrigeration was in the home, because the home had only ice boxes. And icebox refrigerators involved the iceman coming into the house, dripping water over the kitchen, which the housewife had to wipe up, and giving limited cooling to the contents of a refrigerator. Now, most of the companies realized that the crucial problem here was to have a safe refrigerant. And in the late teens and early 20s, they set up teams to try to develop a safe refrigerant. Toward the end of the 20s, they finally found one. The so-called halogenated hydrocarbon family was done by a team of people, of which Mr. Midgley was one of the chief leaders. When this refrigerant was put into manufacture, immediately they were able to make refrigerators of the type that we know today and which are in every household, practically.
Tell us about the early household refrigerators.
After the new halogenated hydrocarbon refrigerators had been developed, and maybe I should say a word about them too, the old refrigerators like ammonia and methyl chloride and sulfur dioxide were terrible to smell, and if they had ever escaped, they would have caused all sorts of trouble. And this prevented former development of the household refrigerator. But the new refrigerator, for example, one that was called Freon 12, could be inhaled by an individual up to 20% of the air they breathed, and wouldn't hurt them. Nothing like that was possible before. Now, as I mentioned before, a number of companies went into trying to develop domestic refrigerators, GE, Frigidaire, and many more. And a number came on the market. Actually, for a while, they used to call a household refrigerator a Frigidaire. That term was used. The reason I mentioned Frigidaire was at that time I was consulting with Frigidaire on a different problem that I think would be interesting to our membership. Really, the first safe household refrigerator that was developed was the gas-fired refrigerator, which went under the name of Electrolux. That was developed in Sweden, but came to this country and all over the world and worked fine. It used ammonia as a refrigerant, but the amount of ammonia that was in it was so small that even if the thing blew up, it would hardly have harmed any person in the house. It would have scared them half to death, I'm sure, but nothing else would happen. I used an Electrolux in my own home for a while, and it worked out very, very well. The early refrigerators were bulky, and some of you may actually remember the General Electric monitor top refrigerator. Do you remember that? That came in. You're too young, I suppose.
Yes, I was definitely too young.
To remember that. In any event, domestic refrigerators using the halogenated hydrocarbon refrigerators started well in the 30s, went on to the present, and each one of you has one in his or her home and enjoys its use.
When did you get involved with ASHRAE?
Well, my first contact was with ASRE, as I think I mentioned. That was in 1935. My second contact with the organization was joining ASHVE, and that was, I'm not sure when, but about 1945. And then, being a member of ASRE and ASHRE, I automatically became a member of ASHRAE when it combined all of these together. And this was actually while I was working in the laboratory, the ASHRE laboratory in Cleveland. 1958, I think, is the year.
What other functions of ASHRAE were you involved with?
Well, I was on numerous technical committees in all of these societies under their respective names. But my main interest had been in publications for the societies. I know that I edited the data book of ASRE one year. I was also editor-in-chief of the guide of the other society in another year. And in connection with committees, I don't want to mention too many names, but my main interest while I was at ASHRAE was with the Committee of Research, which was actually running the laboratory in Cleveland, as well as working actively on publications for the society.
Do you recall the date when the merger took place between the American Society of Heating and Ventilation Engineers merged to the American Society of Heating and Air Conditioning Engineers?
I believe that was in 1953.
Okay. The American Society of Air Conditioning Engineers then merged with what you were president of, the American Society of Refrigeration Engineers, to form the present ASHRAE. And what was the year that took place?
That didn't occur until several years later in 1959.
Okay. Was there any unique function that took place during your term as president?
During my term as president, the annual summer meeting of the society was held on a boat. This was most interesting. The boat was docked at Montreal. All of the members that went to the convention flew or drove to Montreal. We boarded the boat there. It ran down the St. Lawrence River and up one of its tributaries. We got off the boat at various places, looked over the local landscape, got back on the boat. In the meantime, on the boat, all of our meetings were held, and they were very serious engineering meetings. My wife and I enjoyed the trip very much.
Is there any person that you met during your career that you consider significant?
Oh, during my long life, I've met many people. One of the most interesting people that I met was Willis Carrier, who I mentioned before, and he is the man, of course, you know, that is called the father of air conditioning. But an interesting person that I met on the side was occurred while I was at Lehigh, where one of my colleagues had an idea that he was trying to develop, namely to enrich ordinary air, which has 21% oxygen in it by volume, to get it up to 50% oxygen. He thought he had a method that would work. None of us agreed with him. So he said, I want to get other opinion on this. I don't believe what you're telling me about my idea. So Alfred Einstein was at Princeton, and he had made himself available to engineers and scientists who wanted to come to Princeton and consult with him and ask him his views on different things. So we made an appointment to go visit Alfred Einstein in Princeton. It was just about a 2.5-hour ride from Lehigh to Princeton. So a group of us assembled and went to Princeton. We were led into Dr. Einstein's office, had a nice little conversation, asked the question. Einstein said he didn't think it was very feasible, which agreed with our ideas. But during the conversation, the telephone rang. And Einstein answered the telephone. He became very excited and told us, my wife has told me that the water line into the kitchen has frozen and she can't get any water. And he says, I don't know what to do. Well, one of us suggested to him, why don't you ask her to call a plumber? So he called her back and told her to get a plumber. And but he said, I've got to go see her. I've got to go see her. So we said, we will take you. So we got into our car with all of us. We went out to Einstein's house. Things were very quiet there because in the meantime, the plumber had come and fixed the problem. And we had a very pleasant meeting with Mrs. Einstein. So whom have I met? I've met the Einsteins.
At this point, I would like to note that Mr. Jennings was awarded the F. Paul Anderson Medal and also the E.K. Campbell Award of Merit by the Life Members Club of ASHRAE in 1984. The next thing, of all the honors you've received, which of the honors do you consider the most important to you?
I'm very proud of the honors that I got related to ASHRAE, but I received some other honors too that I may be even more proud of. Of course, the first one was that of being elected into the National Academy of Engineering. I was very pleased when I received that. And I think the highest honor I have received in my lifetime is that of being named an honorary member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. There are not many of them.
In closing, I want to thank you for sharing your time and your memories with us today.
Well, I thank you for asking me to do it.